What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2023. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it as they come out, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, before we actually get into the phone itself, I want to take a quick look at the box and what comes inside it. So as you can see, Moto G Stylus 2023, made with the typical eco-friendly material they've been using lately, so definitely a bit of a difference from 2022. And now inside the box, there's really not a whole lot, but we got a SIM card removal tool, quick start guide and safety information, and then finally, we got a USB-C cable. Pretty typical, but keep in mind, there is no wall adapter included. Now, depending on where you get this phone, if you get it from like a carrier like Cricket, for example, or something like that, it might be a bit different, but this phone that did come factory unlocked through Motorola doesn't actually have a wall adapter, which on one hand is kind of disappointing because I believe last year's Moto G Stylus did actually come with one. Almost forgot about that, but as you can see, the Moto G Stylus 2022 does actually come with a wall adapter, whereas unfortunately the 2023 doesn't, so again, a little disappointing, but in general, a lot of manufacturers now don't include it. I know Samsung, for example, doesn't have them anymore either. So despite being a little too bad, it's really not surprising. But moving on to the phone itself. With the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2023, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. Now, in general, to be fair, the display is at least decent. I mean, it definitely doesn't look bad, but at the same time, I kind of have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, considering the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2022 had a much larger display and a 1080p resolution, it definitely feels like quite a downgrade to have a 6.5-inch display versus 6.8 and only a 720p resolution. But at the same time, independently, if we completely ignore the Moto G Stylus 2022 by itself for more of an entry-level phone, I do think the display we're getting here is at least pretty decent. Despite only having a 720p resolution, things do look decently sharp. And at 6.5 inches, despite not being like impressively large or anything, I would say it's decently large enough to give you a good experience. So overall, if you're looking for a phone that has a pretty nice display, but you don't really need the absolute best, then this display is most likely going to be perfectly fine for you. Now, another thing I do want to point out here is that with the Moto G Stylus 2023, factory unlocked at full price, this phone is going for around $199, whereas with the Moto G Stylus 2022, I specifically remember when that phone first came out, I paid like $299 for it. So this phone is definitely a bit more affordable. Now, considering you can get the Moto G Stylus 2022 for like maybe $150 or something depending on where you get it, the actual advantage this has is probably a little debatable, but I imagine when this phone really starts to get to US carriers, you are going to see some pretty good deals for it. But with that in mind, considering this phone is a bit more affordable, I do definitely understand why the display is a bit of a downgrade. Now for storage, with the Moto G Stylus 2023, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So on one hand, definitely at least a decent amount of storage, but on the other hand, I personally consider 64GB to be more or less a bare minimum. And this is yet another thing when compared to the Moto G Stylus 2022, it is definitely a downgrade because that phone did have 128. Whereas again, this phone only has 64. But if you're maybe not really a super heavy user, if you're not constantly downloading all kinds of new apps and games and stuff like that, then you should be perfectly fine with this phone. I mean, again, it does have microSD card expansion, which definitely helps. So in most cases, for the average user, you should be okay. But if storage is a bit more important to you, then I would say in general, you can definitely do better. Now for security features, with the Moto G Stylus 2023, we are getting Face Unlock, as well as a nice fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, that fingerprint scanner was real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so definitely nice that we get both options here. Now taking a look at the camera setup with the Moto G Stylus 2023, up front, we get a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel macro camera. And then for video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here, but honestly, I'm really not surprised at all. But what I am kind of surprised about is that unfortunately, the Moto G Stylus 2023 doesn't have an ultra-wide camera, which is definitely disappointing, considering the Moto G Stylus 2022 had one. And honestly, I want to say maybe not all, but definitely a lot of phones in this price range do have ultra-wide cameras, and seeing that they took away that feature, I feel like it's such a popular feature that it just really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So if you are looking for a more affordable phone that has an ultra-wide camera, then again, keep in mind, unfortunately, the Moto G Stylus 2023 doesn't have one, but at least it does have a macro camera, so you can still get those close-up detailed images. And with a 50 megapixel main camera, although seeing as this is a first impressions video, I haven't actually used the camera yet, I am expecting the overall camera quality to be pretty decent. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Moto G Stylus 2023, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G85 processor. Now one thing I do want to point out here is that with this phone, we're not getting 5G connectivity. That being said, there is a Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 that's probably going to be coming out pretty soon. In fact, I actually saw the specs for it on GSM Arena, so for all I know, it might already be out. I haven't really looked into it too much, but keep in mind, the Moto G Stylus 5G, as always, is a completely separate phone, and this phone in my hand is the regular Moto G Stylus 2023, and this again is not a 5G phone. That being said though, in my experience, the performance has been at least decent, pretty much exactly what I expected. Not really the fastest phone out there, but for basic activities like web browsing, social media, videos, and maybe some light mobile gaming and stuff like that, it's really not slow either. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So as always, what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device. Because of course, depending on what you have, it may or may not actually be a performance upgrade, but I would say in general compared to the Moto G Stylus 2022, it's pretty much the same. It's not really worse or better. So really, if you're doing those more basic activities like web browsing and social media, and maybe you're watching a decent amount of videos and stuff like that, at least performance-wise, you will get a pretty decent experience here. But if you're really going to be on your phone a lot doing more demanding activities, then you are probably going to want something faster. Now for the battery, like most newer Motorola phones, we are getting a really good battery here. With the Moto G Stylus 2023, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery. This supports 15-watt fast charging, so definitely a good battery here. The charging speeds are definitely not bad, but maybe not the best either, especially when compared to something like the Samsung Galaxy A23 or something like that. That's gonna have 25-watt fast charging instead, which actually does make more of a difference than it sounds like. But in general, in my experience, the charging speeds are at least decent. I mean, before this video, I plugged this phone into a 60-watt MacBook charger, and it charged from like 25% to 99 in maybe an hour or less. I wasn't really paying too much attention, but in general, for the average user, the charging speed will at least be decent. And with a 5000 mAh battery, this is a really large battery, so you can expect to get some great battery life and longevity here. So in general, if the battery is more of a priority for you, then this phone will be a pretty good choice. Now for the software, with the Moto G Stylus 2023, we are getting Android 13, which is definitely great to see. I was kind of worried when the Moto G Play 2023 came out, and unfortunately that phone only had Android 12, but luckily with this phone, again, we are getting Android 13, so if you do want the latest version of Android, you're not going to have to worry there. But unfortunately, when it comes to other features, the Moto G Stylus 2023 does not have NFC, so if you want to use tap and pay, you are going to have to get something else. This is definitely disappointing because at this point, it is 2023, and I mean, even though this is a 4G phone, I've seen plenty of 4G phones that have NFC, so I feel like there's really no excuse now. But that being said, if you do want a Motorola phone that's similar to this, and you do want NFC, you could always get the Stylus 5G. The 2022 one definitely has it, and I'm just gonna assume the 2023 is probably gonna have it. But in general, those are the only Moto G phones I know of that do have NFC. And again, this phone in my hand does not have it, so definitely keep this in mind. But on the bright side, as the name of the phone suggests, the Moto G Stylus 2023 does in fact have a stylus, and it's pretty much the same design as before. And in my experience, it definitely does work really well. Really responsive, maybe not to the level of a much higher end device, but for more basic handwritten notes, navigating, and stuff like that, it definitely does get the job done. And I feel like every time Motorola releases a phone like this, the stylus gets better. So honestly, I really have no complaints here for what it does. It definitely does get the job done, and it even kind of makes a little drawing sound. I didn't notice that. But yeah, definitely cool. So if you are looking for a phone that has a stylus, then of course, this phone will be a great choice. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2023. In general, I'm gonna be honest here, in most ways, this phone is really a bit of a downgrade. On one hand, like I mentioned earlier, it is a bit less expensive, so I will give it that. But considering you can get the Moto G Stylus 2022 for some pretty good deals now, I feel like that advantage is really not that useful, in considering this phone has a smaller display, with a lower resolution, about half the storage, fewer camera features, roughly equal performance, to be fair. It's not slower, but it's definitely not faster, and still still no NFC. I feel like in general, if you maybe have the Stylus 2022 for example, and you're considering getting this phone as an upgrade, then keep in mind, even based on my first impressions, this phone is really not going to be an upgrade in any way, except I guess maybe the Stylus is a tiny bit more responsive, but even that really isn't much of a difference. So in general, on one hand, if you're really just looking for a super affordable phone that has a stylus, and you don't really care about having the nicest display, a ton of storage, the best camera features, NFC, 5G connectivity, or really good performance, and you really just need something decent and affordable that works, then in that case, the Moto G Stylus 2023 is going to be perfectly fine. But if you're really looking for something that's significantly better than the Stylus 2022, then you're definitely going to want to probably wait for the Moto G Stylus 5G to come out. And after seeing this phone, I honestly don't really have high expectations for that either. But those were my first impressions for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2023. Overall, definitely not an upgrade from last year, but by itself, for more of an affordable budget offering, I do think it is a decent choice that's at least worth considering. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description. As of right now, I don't have any other videos about it, but as I make them, I will be linking to them there, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.